up presentation number 11 by Eli Berenbaum, and the topic is casually-driven healthcare science.
Causally. Oh, thanks. Good afternoon.
I've been doing this all day. Floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Appreciate that our proposal was selected. Thank you. Today I'll talk about causally-driven healthcare science. I am Elias. This is joint work with our joint project with Adib and Pavlos. First, I'd like to discuss why people in healthcare should care about causality. And I'll start with some pieces of news. We are bombarded of news of this kind. For example, alcohol causes 20,000 cancer deaths in the US annually. Then if you keep reading the news a little bit more and wait a few years, you'll see that one drink of red wine or alcohol is relaxing to circulation, but 2 drinks are stressful. Then it seems that it's not all lost. There is some sort of threshold, but you can have one drink. Then it comes the next one that is like, why do heavy drinkers outlive non-drinkers? That is great, yay, I'm happy. Socially, responsibly. Then if you go on, you have association of nut consumption with the mortality. This is from the New England Journal of Medicine. And then you have about the possible effects of grapefruit. And the question here is like, what's going on? Those are kind of coming from research. In the best places, some of the brightest are generating this research. And if you wait maybe a few years, X years, 2 or 3 years, you have a flip in the conclusion of the study. Then this is in the healthcare. That means that there is a challenge. And the challenge is about the principles of, what are the principles of how to generate evidence in the health system, or more in particular medicine. And basically there are 2 types of data that you can use to support your statements or your claims. The first one is observational type, that is non-experimental, as you call. All time that you are listening a lot this word big data, but every time that you listen big data, 99% of the data is of this kind. It's highly biased type of data. This is the challenge using this type of data. Types of bias that you could have, one is confounding bias or selection bias and so on. Just to have an idea of the problem with that, regulatory agencies, for example, do not recognize this type of data as evidence to approve a new drug. Then this is one type. On the other extreme, we have randomized controlled trials, RCTs, that is experimental type of data that solves or controls for some of these biases, but is not perfect. Then few problems. One of them is known as the lack of external validity, as known in the sciences, or in computer science or machine learning, we call lack of generalizability. You cannot use beyond the population that you perform the experiment. Few challenges, other challenges with that, there is the cost to run all these trials is like $5 or $10 million to collect this data. It's very time consuming. It takes a few years. And there are ethical issues because we're doing experimentation with human subjects. Another problem, despite all of that, there is issues of sample complexity, as you call. There are very few samples. Perhaps you have 500 subjects or 300 subjects. Then you have issues of statistical power in order to make the claim. Then this leads us to the problem. Format is from my PowerPoint. It's not perfect, but there is this leads to the problem that we call the data fusion problem. A research question that we are trying to answer is how to combine a heterogeneous collection of biased data sets so as that we can, causal effects can be inferred and some kind of mechanistic understanding about the system can be inferred. Applications of that will be interesting if you have this data understanding about the data fusion. Examples, expedited randomized trial or faster randomized clinical trials, and personalized medicine. I think what's unique about our approach, basically we identify the missing piece in the puzzle, that I would say that is the lack of causal semantics in all this type of data collections. And our strategy that we have to circumvent that will build on the graphical language of causality. Just to give you an example of the project, one possible task that we are interested in generating explainable decision-making systems. You are in the context of healthcare, but we got this cartoon from the DARPA Explainable AI Initiative. It's a huge project called XAI. I'll not go piece by piece, but the main idea is like today you have this kind of training data, then you have some kind of machine learning algorithm, and then you learn a box. We call learn function here, but it's essentially a black box that allows us to do maybe classification or decision making as we are interested here. What we like to have in reality is some kind of box, open this box, and have some type of explainable model. And what is attractive about our approach, that we believe that explainable is tightly related to have a mechanistic causal understanding of the system. We don't think that there is a way of circumventing that. Then yeah, that's our approach. I think one good question is like, seems to be a very ambitious goal, and there are many players there. Then the question is like, why are we believe that this is possible or the team is good? I think there are two angles or two legs here. The first one is the causal inference. That is the key component, or one of the two key components. The work of the PI. I'm here working many years in bias analysis, data fusion, and decision making under uncertainty. I'll just get a sample that I think is a good summary if you are curious. That is this recent paper that appeared in PNAS that summarizes the last maybe 6 or 7 years of work in the problem. The other leg is the team that we are focused on application in the healthcare, and the two main ones that we are interested in is cardiovascular disease and heart failure, and respiratory diseases. And then we have the two co-PIs, Pavlos and Adib, and their collaborators that will be helping with that. The benefits, I think they are obvious at this point, but our number one goal is to improve human health and human condition and use the patient outcomes. The disease that you pick in the previous slide is not by coincidence, but those are the top 5 diseases that you have that generate more pain and suffering and costs in the healthcare system. One thing that I think is interesting to mention, that we are in a good time, that is related to there is huge effort and momentum in collecting huge amount of data, initiatives for that, but they're not so focused about how to use this data. That will be the next natural second step. Then this is our focus. One valid question is why a computer scientist is interested in this kind of problem. I would say that there are many theoretical computer science problems embedded in there to exactly disentangle this causal mechanism and open the black box. And typical CS questions will be to prove faster and robust decision making. This is the kind of results that we are looking for. Then there is a good synergy about the application and the foundation in ML, in AI. Then a good question here is about why Purdue. I already mentioned the first one about the team. I think we are being supported, or hopefully building on the strength of the Archie to find a strong collaboration with healthcare providers and hospital networks, and also building the infrastructure of the Discovery Park. There's plenty of competition, for sure. This is just a sample. In some ways, they are more advanced, in some ways they are behind. For example, there is a center in UPenn that is just dedicated in the Center for Causal Inference. Then this is one possible competitor. There's also competitors in the industry. Just recently, Amazon said that they are joining the efforts in the healthcare space, and they're trying to get a chunk or solve the healthcare, given that they are both solve the healthcare system. Then I'm almost done. I need more 2 seconds. The budget, I will not go one by one, and the milestones, essentially how you do papers and submit grants. Thank you, and I would be happy to take your questions.
So thank you, Les. I guess my question really has to do with,
do I still have my job?
To do with, what you think about the availability of the appropriate data to make the kinds of conclusions about
the availability
of data. I mean, are you envisioning new ways of collecting data to be able to answer the kinds of causality questions that you're talking about, or is that possible with what has been collected today? And
yeah, that's a good
how
question.
do you go about getting to that data if it is new?
Yeah, there some effort. We already have project with Archie. Then there is some data that we need. It's non-trivial sometimes to have access to this data. You go through a process with Adib of months until we can get the data. But when the study is publicly funded, there is some type of obligation or implicit obligation. The guy should make the data available. Then for our settings, sometimes you need to go after the data. Sometimes in this cardio and pulmonary, you have access to the people that can provide us the data. But more broadly, we assume that our number one focus is not the data collection. It's assuming that the data was collected, and with public money, we will be able to touch it in some way. I think the answer in 2 parts is like, yeah, for the more immediate problems, you have access to some data that is critical for us. In the long term, it is a challenge to be able to touch the data, and it requires other skills that are not exactly the technical ones. It's like a political battle.
So, Elias, you mentioned there's a lot of people that are interested in this space. Can you say a little bit about what you feel is sort of the unique contribution to your team?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I think that all these words, like we have personalized medicine or faster trial, a lot of people use the same words. But technically speaking, they are not coming from this causal angle. And you can kind of show that if you don't do that, you are kind of doomed to failure, right? We are doomed in some way. Then the cartoons that I show in the beginning in the newspapers, this is not a, meaning it's funny and amusing, but this is the truth. This is the current state of affairs. Then I think having a more serious approach, taking the causal inference theory in a kind of front and center, this is the one differential. There are people taking other types of causal approach, but then we need to get into the weeds to discuss why we are better in some sense. But yeah.
I had a question. I think it's related to where I thought Sunil's question was going about really, can you really prove causality in the application you're working in? What's the way that you would approach that confidence that would be required, and especially in the healthcare area, on causality?
Right. How to prove causality is a good question that I cannot answer in one sentence. But the idea is that the challenge is how can you combine. Let me see if I find it here. How can you combine? Usually I have two approaches. One is like very, how can I say, subjective. That is the physician from his head or based on his opinion and experiences, how he provides care. This is one approach that is basically based on his knowledge and how he synthesized the literature in his mind. There is other approach that people is trying to take that is more like purely quantitative. I just get the data in, or I try to use some kind of natural language and mine the literature, summarize this thing, and hope to have a completely automated system. One thing that we can show that both of them are not enough. In some way, we need to glue these different pieces. In other words, the data that is coming plus the substantive kind of mechanistic knowledge that we have, scientific knowledge that we have in the field, such that you can make a claim that is causally sensible in some sense. Then and what allows us to glue the pieces is some causal theory. Then, yeah, that's the idea. But I cannot write here at the moment to you when I hear the word how to prove causality. In my mind, it means I cannot write a theorem, at least not now, saying how I prove it. This is the computer science mindset. There is no answer for that. But the question is how do we blend, the summary is how do we blend substantive, mechanistic understanding that is accumulated for 200 years, plus the data in order to make claims that are stronger than the pieces individually. Well, sorry, this is time for the questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess my question would be, I think this is very interesting. The big data part of it, you might think of as being establishing the kind of generalizability part. It seems like this is what you're saying, maybe I'm wrong, about causality. And then the other part you need for a causal argument is to establish the connections between cause and effect, because you can have ridiculous connections between causes and effects that are generalized, that you find patterns in, but the patterns are epiphenomenal to something else. So you want to connect the cause to the effect in a kind of theoretical story or some kind of connection. So I guess the thing I was going to ask is how, it sounds like that will be the randomized controlled trial, if that's where you're going to try to show your theoretical connection, or maybe kind of more specific. I'm not getting a sense of like what specifically are you going to do to try to get at that connection part?
There are two pieces, if I understood the question correctly. One, the generalizability issue is like when you conduct a trial, usually you go to a IU hospital or some kind of reference hospital, and then you run the trial, but all you can get causal connections or causal relations there, but it's just about this population. Then the question like, how can I make a claim about the US, given that I never did the experiment in the US in reality, some people said, but it doesn't exist. It's just a bunch of pieces. Then how from this particular piece how I generalize? This is one question. The other one is like if I have pieces of causal knowledge, like this drug have this positive effect, how I put that in a bigger piece, maybe with other types of data. Then this is, it's part of the project, how to put the pieces of the puzzle together in some sense. Make sense?
Yes, that's excellent.
Eli, thank you very much.
Oh, thanks.